I think we might start. So welcome everyone. It's my particular pleasure to chair this second webinar of the MOOC Skills for Labor and Environmental Justice. What we want to do today is to consolidate the first forum activity we have launched now 2 weeks ago on the forum. The activity was concerned with the case of glyphosate, balancing health, environment, and agriculture. And it's up to me today to chair this session, and I want to share with you the agenda for this live event. And just to let you know, of course, that we are recording the webinar for those that will not be able to attend live, so they will have the chance to watch again the webinar on the Moodle platform of our MOOC. So I will briefly give you an overall introduction on this forum activity, what we have done, what we have achieved through the two groups that have been involved in this activity in the forum of our MOOC platform. Then Olga and Marwan will consolidate all the positions the two groups have expressed in the two forum activities, summarizing them and arguing in favor of against the European Commission license, renewal of the license to use glyphosate in the European Union. There we will give the floor to you, to the audience, to fuel the discussion, to bring your insights, to intervene, and to, contribute to this live great debate. And last but not least, we will reflect on the learning outcomes of this activity. And Franklin Kimbimbi will provide you an analysis of what type of competencies we have developed through this forum activity and the great debate. So let's start with the introduction. First of all, I want to emphasize the sectoral relevance of the case we have addressed in this forum activity. This is just an example of a transitionary dilemma beyond manufacturing and the energy transition, because normally when we deal with just transition and problems related to decarbonization and transitions away from fossil fuels, we tend to focus on the energy sector and the implication of the energy transitions over different sectors in different industry. So with this case, we wanted to show you that labor and environmental justice problems could arise also in a different sector, which is the agricultural one. But this is just, again, an example, and I invite you to reflect on similar issues that we have addressed in this forum activity in relation to other transitionary cases and dilemmas. And not only in manufacturing. Think, for example, to similar implications for other products, other chemicals, such as GMOs, nanotechnologies, microplants in food products and cosmetics, etc. So this is just a sectoral example, but it goes beyond the sectoral dimension, okay? So I really want you to connect the dots and think about the similar implications for other industries. Think also to the geographical relevance of our case. Of course, our case focused on the European Union, and we commented, we criticized, or we pretend to approve the European Commission's decision to extend the license to use glyphosate in the European Union. But of course, think also to the relevance of this case beyond Europe. First of all, because similar problems could arise in other jurisdictions, in other regions, in other countries, but think also to the international implications of this EU case, because when it comes to regulating a sector, we are regulating the competition within that sector. So if we have a limited scope of our regulation, then we could face problems of social dumping from other countries that have more relaxed regulation about the same product. So this is also an aspect that I want to bring to your attention. The geographical relevance of our case, the geographical scope of the regulation that we have introduced with this forum activity. And then, of course, this was really clear from the debate that you have contributed to fuel in the forum discussion, the discussion forum, that there are very different dimensions or different, reflecting different interests involved in this case study, in this dilemma. There is the point of view of workers, there is the point of view of farmers, policymakers, politicians, science, which plays a very important role in giving us data about the potential danger of this product for human health and environment. So there are really multiple stakeholders and different interests involved. And this is pretty clear from your entries, from your posts in the forum activity that Olga and Marwan will summarize after my presentation. What is also evident is the key role of policymakers and other relevant stakeholders at national or local level. Because on the one hand, it is true that this is about EU regulation. But from some of your entries, we have learned, and we really enjoy to learn, that at national level, policymakers, NGOs, and other relevant stakeholders, including the trade union, could, for example, contribute here the implementation of such regulation towards a more favorable condition of application of that regulation for workers. They could limit it. They could join in campaigns against the application of the license on glyphosate. They could campaign, for example, to reduce the use of glyphosate at local level, okay? So there is the EU level, but there is also the national, regional, and local dimension in which we could contribute to achieve justice in a dilemma like the one that we have proposed to you. Then another key aspect that emerged in the discussion is, of course, complexity. This is also reflected in the different interests involved in the case, as I mentioned before. And we see that against the very different interests involved in this case, it's not that straightforward to strike a balance between the different interests. It's not easy to take a very strong position, which also means it's very difficult to shape the idea of justice behind this case. What is justice? How could we define justice in relation to the case of glyphosate? What kind of interest we consider, what kind of concern we consider, and we prioritize in our idea of justice. Okay, and this is similar to other just transition issues. And it points me to underline the ambivalence and ambiguity of the just transition principle. Depending on the different standpoints, point of views, given policy could be more just or more unjust, could be fair or unfair, okay? Today, we will try to find our own way to define what justice is in this case. And we are learning all together. I mean, we don't have the answers to the critical questions that we have posed in this forum activity. And this also, I think, partially reflects the complexity that the European Commission itself had to address in the policy-making process before deciding about the renewal of the license of use of glyphosate in Europe. And there is also ambivalence and ambiguity, for example, when it comes to some key legal concepts that are involved in this case. The precautionary principle is exemplificatory in this respect. And I'm sure that Olga Marwan will argue about this very complex issue, which also involves, again, the role of science, evidence that we could bring to inform policy making, okay? Last but not least, I wanted you to reflect on the links between this forum activity and the first module's lectures, video lectures. It was intentional for us to choose this critical dilemma, the one of glyphosate, because it's very important for us to contextualize the labor-environment nexus. If you have watched, for example, the first 3 videos in module 1, you could probably link the case to the different arguments made by my colleagues in the 3 video lectures. This is a case in which humans pretend to control nature using pesticides, using chemicals. So when it comes, for example, to Ania Zagrebreska video on labor and land, you should also rewatch it, thinking to our case, thinking to the case of glyphosate. And you will realize that there is much of the key ingredients, the key message that Ania wants to deliver to you could also be read again, reinterpret, construed through the case study. So this case study really helps in really grasping the key messages of the first 3 videos. The ecological limits to growth, the relationship between humans, human beings, and nature. Okay? Now, we want to learn from your entries, from your perspective. And I'm very grateful to Olga Marwan for having read all your posts and having summarized them into fantastic videos that I will share right now, which are the integral part of this great debate. So the debate will be divided into 2 parts. The first part is the video by Olga, which represents the position of group number 1 in the forum activity. So she will argue against the renewal of the license of using glyphosate in Europe, while the second video will be by Marwan, that will represent the position of the opponent group, arguing against the decision of the European Union. Okay? After watching the first 2 videos, I will give the floor to the audience for further reactions, for any other comment and opinion to fuel the discussion, to fuel the debate. Okay? So let me share now Olga's video.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Olga Rubagotti, and I'm introducing the Group 1 argument against the use of glyphosate. In the wake of the European Commission decision to renew the license for glyphosate, as activist, trade union representative, labor and environmental law scholars, but especially as workers' rights advocates, we want to show you all how the European Commission's decision to renew the license for glyphosate goes against the general principle of international law and the principles of the European Union's too on health and environmental protection. What is glyphosate? Glyphosate is a systemic herbicide defined as total, not able to act selectively. The absorption occurs at leaf level, but within few hours, the herbicide is spread through the plants and the ground. Its use is extremely widespread in agriculture to preserve crops and then market them. So much so that today there are reportedly 750 products on the market based on this herbicide, traces of which can be found in soil, food, air, and water. Worldwide, the glyphosate market is estimated to be worth $54 million. But which is the issue for us? The issue concerns the dangerousness of glyphosate for the ecosystem, since several scientific studies, which I will discuss during this argument, prove its harmfulness on diverse perspectives, and these perspectives are all equally relevant. First perspective, the worker-centered perspective. The agricultural workforce is exposed to the potential long-term health consequences associated with exposure to glyphosate. Agricultural workers are particularly vulnerable due to the frequent and direct contact with the herbicide. They are at risk of developing chronic health conditions, and their families may also be exposed too. Moreover, in the hypothesis they may not be informed about the potential danger of glyphosate, they may not be able to refuse using it. They may not be able to quit the job. Second, the community perspective. Adjacent villages which share proximity to these agricultural fields are exposed to the potential risk posed by chemical exposure, raising questions about the long-term health impact on residents. Third, the food security perspective. Long-term food security and the safety of humans, animals, and plant life are undermined using weed killer and industrial farming in general, raising significant concerns about the long-term sustainability of our food supply chain. The benefit is purely in the very short term to produce a maximum yield for a small number of wealthy people. Instead, its pervasive presence in our food supply and the associated health risks, which are of concern to any consumers. First, the environmental perspective. According to this specific perspective, we cannot forget that glyphosate has simultaneously the spread of GMO crops, intensive agriculture, groundwater contamination, soil degradation, ecological imbalance of rivers and lakes, and bee disease. Last one, the bee perspective. We cannot forget that even if the Commission decision affects EU lands, we have another perspective, the perspective of the fight against colonialism, especially referred to the Global South. Glyphosate is for many in the developing South a symbol of colonial legacy. And in some contexts, the use of glyphosate goes hand in hand with the use of patented seeds for crops that are genetically modified to be glyphosate resistant, purchased in terms of complex and exclusionary contractual and intellectual property arrangements, anathema to local agricultural practice that further the cause of dependence with limited rewards for local communities, while eroding local knowledge and traditional and sustainable agricultural practice. All this evidence clearly contradicts European legislation on workers' health and safety, public health, and environmental protection. But above all, the Commission's decision is one of the cardinal EU principles. The precautionary principle, which is regulated by Art 191 of TFEU. The EU justifies the use of the precautionary principle under three conditions. One, the identification of potentially negative effects, the evaluation of available scientific data, and the extent of scientific uncertainty. In this case, the potentially negative effects of using the substance are very clear. Just as the scientific evidence is manifold and clear, which, contrary to the Commission decision statement, supports the carcinogenic probability of glyphosate. We don't understand how, in reaching its decision, the European Commission failed to mention the findings of the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which highlight that this herbicide has a strong xenotoxicity and classified this kind of substance as probably carcinogenic to humans. There are several scientific evidence showing a correlation between glyphosate and lymphomas, in particular non-Hodgkin lymphoma, neurodegenerative diseases, and autism. Moreover, the National Institute of Health support that its intensive and large-scale use can trigger neurotoxic effects, including oxidative stress, alteration, and neuronal growth. But moreover, the Journal of National Cancer Institute measured glyphosate levels in the urine of farmers and found high level of toxins associated with oxidative stress, a condition that causes DNA damage. The Commission seems to have ignored this evidence in its haste to avoid banning this herbicide, but merely recommended that member states take precaution. And now the question is why? Assuming the EU decision is driven by the need to safeguard workers involved in the entire supply chain, we want to show you that there are a lot of alternative solutions to this problem. And we want to show you that we need a just transition approach, because in change, no one should be left behind. And we want to reach this alternative solution through the replacement of pesticide and pollutants. And we want that agricultural production methods should become greener. We need the conversion of farming methods, and also we need the reprofessionalization of farmers. And we need also the creation of new agricultural knowledge. To reach this goal, for us, it's better to take source from indigenous knowledge and the indigenous way to do agriculture. We want to take our source from regenerative agriculture and the use of cover crops, green manures. And we need a 4-day week combined with an increase in urban land and land near the city. And last, we need more political restrictions on food waste. Of course, we are aware that any transformation in production models may result in job losses. And we want to propose solutions on several levels. Governments should act with income support policies, active employment policies of relocation. At the same time, collective bargaining can manage this change through workers' protection clauses, according to the general idea that no one should be left behind. For instance, we need outplacement and retraining clauses for workers, such as those already negotiated in existing collective agreements for metal, coal sectors, and plastic industry. In conclusion, glyphosate is a really cheap weed killer, and its price does not integrate its potential impact on human health and environmental protection. Society will pay the price. Who really gains from glyphosate use and who loses? There is a system for monitoring the lobbying activity in European Union, but it doesn't seem to be enough. And that's why we ask, first of all, for a review of this dangerous and unjust decision. We must shift our focus towards sustainable and eco-friendly agricultural practices that ensure food security without compromising the environments and people else. And to reach this goal, we need a multi-level action. We call for greater intervention at international and communitarian levels to design public policy in promotion of sustainable agriculture, and by national legislator through the leverage of tax incentives for small and medium-sized farmers, but also for companies that freely decide not to use glyphosate, all with the aim of mitigating potential negative externalities. We ask states to take serious measures and restrict the use of glyphosate. We ask states to fund independent research. And at the local level, more public campaigns where trade unions can join together with NGOs and all citizens to demand that companies stop or reduce the use of glyphosate despite the EU license. Let's remember that there are no profits on a planet that will slowly die. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Olga, for this fantastic overview of Group 1 position. And I just want to mention, because I didn't do it before, that Group 2, for Group 2 is the first time they learn about the arguments and position of Group 1 and vice versa, okay? Now, before giving the floor to Marwan with his second video, let me ask if someone from Group 1 wants to step in the conversation, complementing or adding to Olga's arguments. Do you want to, yeah? Do you have any comment now, or you want to contribute later on after we watch Marwan's video? Feel free to raise your hand. Pia.
Thank you very much, Olga, for putting our ideas together. What I actually was thinking when you were listing the most important issues, especially under the just transition. So before this weed killer is away from use, maybe there could be something related to occupation safety and health perspective also, because that was lacking from the list. That's shortly I could say. And then question I was starting to wonder myself, that would it mean if there is no glyphosate, or how you call it, that it it really means less work, because that was the question, that does it automatically mean that there is less work? Is that really an argument? So these are the first reactions, but thanks very much.
So Pia, you are from Group 1, right?
Yes, I am a Group 1. I'm from the same group, yes, and I did recognize many of Olga's points.
So thanks a lot. Anyone else from Group 1 that want to add to Olga's presentation? So that was really exhaustive.
Okay, and look in the chat, maybe.
Yeah, a comment by Daphne. I'm a bit concerned about the tax incentive solution as it only states glyphosate. That might have a off-target effect of incentivizing use of other worse herbicides, pesticides. Of course, yeah, this is one issue, but it would be up to policymaker to well design these tax incentives so to avoid these kind of negative externalities, I guess. Isabella?
Yes, thank you very much, Olga, for this presentation. As Pia have said too, it was quite encompassing. I wanted just to highlight the fact that perhaps we could have restate more clearly that there are already some action taken at national level, and this action can help us to move on better on some actions at European level, perhaps. So already national policies that are trying to do something on glyphosate.
Yeah, indeed. And this is an important message. I mean, civil society, trade unions, NGOs could be vocal at national and local level to stop it, even if there is a renewal of the license at EU level. So there are different dimensions for collective action about this issue and other similar cases. Anyone else from Group 1? Okay, so I think it's time to shift to Marwan's presentation about the position of Group 2. Let me share Marwan's video with you.
Hello to everyone. My name is Marwan Lavas, and this is the presentation that aims to collect the general view of Group 2 arguing in favor of the European Commission decision to continue using glyphosate following the farmer's perspective. But first of all, what are we talking about? It has already been stated by my colleague Olga representing Group 1 that glyphosate is not a simple herbicide, but the most used in our times. This means that it is largely important to have a debate on what implication this herbicide has. At the same time, this brings me to state that the usage of glyphosate is today a needed reality, and its abandonment is not an easy aim to be pursued. Let's start by knowing to what extent the glyphosate is important today. Indeed, glyphosate is the herbicide or herbicide component that allows a certain control of agricultural weed, enabling farmers to kill weed without killing their crops. This means to make possible the development of the agricultural sector and all the implications that this sector has in our society. This affirmation has two main extents. First, the glyphosate itself represent a strong economic sector in which an important number of workers, families, and communities depend directly or indirectly. In this sense, to abandon glyphosate would imply the impossibility to fulfill the market needs, what would lead to an important number of companies with no other solution than closure. On the second hand, glyphosate is, by today, the only alternative that can face the demands of the population in terms of agricultural needs. It's thanks to this herbicide that farmers can produce under the current level of demand in a safe way in terms of food security. This apparently will be even more needed in the coming future regarding the growing population of our planet. All this means that abandoning its usage would not affect just the people concerned to the agricultural sector, but the whole society will encounter difficulties such not being able to access essential products. The third important aspect to be considered within the glyphosate industry is the job creation and economic growth that this sector implies. The amount of money that this sector moves is quantified in around $10 billion. The use of glyphosate has led to substantial employment opportunities directly within the sector itself and indirectly through associated industries and services. The increased use of glyphosate correlates with enhanced job security and job creation at various locations, providing a stable economic benefit in regions where these jobs are situated. In this scenario, it should be asked what would mean to abandon this sector, to abandon the use of glyphosate. Indeed, its abandonment would lead, first of all, to the loss of direct jobs. Secondly, it would affect the loss of indirect jobs in all those adjacent industries. But more worryingly, on an economic level, it would affect individual families and concrete communities in deprived parts of our society, making them even more affected by the economic shock. This, combined with the lack of social protection tools, makes a possible transition to another product practically unthinkable. First, because an alternative would be necessary, which for now seems to be non-existent. And secondly, because the social system would have to have concrete measures that would allow the people affected to overcome the socioeconomic crisis that this would entail. It is obvious that this social protection is not prepared to deal with such a shock. One example is the just transition agreements, which are taking an exaggerated number of years to show positive results, while families continue to be affected by the economic challenges of political decisions. Some of the opponents of glyphosate use have argued that there is an important risk to the health and safety of people and of our planet. However, these implications seem to have no clear scientific basis, since the scientific community has not stated a concrete position against the use of glyphosate and its consequences to the human health and safety. In this sense, no international institution has stated the clear ban of this product because of the affectation to the population. Nor has it been demonstrated in the field of cancer and mutagenic agents that glyphosate can be a component that directly causes concrete diseases. On the other hand, a lot of improvements have been made regarding those that interact in first hand with this component, concretely workers. This is thanks to all the protection mechanisms that have been put in practice at industrial level, such as the design and use of written work procedures that detail the safe use of pesticides, the use of equipment and materials that allow glyphosate to be isolated, ventilation measures or other collective protection measures, the use of personal protective equipment, the specific health surveillance measures, or the information training. for workers. That's why the European Commission renewal of glyphosate use is considered positive by Group 2, since the risk that surrounds this component does not imply a need to abandon its use. As a background to this, it is important to highlight that on 30th May 2022, the Committee for Risk Assessments of the agency adopted its opinion on the harmonized classification and labeling of glyphosate, in which it concluded that the existing classification of glyphosate established under Regulation number 1272/2008 should be maintained. The committee also confirmed that based on the latest scientific and technical information available, and in light of the criteria laid down in that regulation, glyphosate does not meet any criteria to be classified as carcinogenic, mutagenic, or toxic for reproduction. However, this does not mean that there is no risk and danger concerning the use of glyphosate. Group 2 is not naive to that. As happens with other products, deserves to address this risk should play an important role. In this sense, examples that should be mentioned are the ones that we listed before from the workers' perspective, or the following in a more general approach, such as methodology plans. Methodology plans means inappropriate usage of glyphosate reduce greatly its danger. New techniques to eliminate glyphosate from products and environments, such as water, and a proper social dialogue to come up with new solutions, or a more attentive research on the topic in order to get more clear conclusions about the consequences of this component and people's safety. In addition to all the aspects that have been shared in this presentation, it is interesting to identify that glyphosate has important and positive implications in some spheres, such as sustainability, and as a tool to fight against climate change. In this sense, glyphosate helps to reduce soil erosion, it helps to reduce carbon dioxide emissions, and studies have shown that glyphosate does not pose a threat to the health of wildlife, contrary to other pesticides that do. Obviously, the use of certain products at exaggerated and irresponsible levels can pose a risk and danger to people, as we mentioned. That is why it is important for Group 2 to make a note regarding the possible wrong usage of glyphosate. Control and monitoring measures are important both within and outside the industry. That is why we encourage the various institutions to carry out more research and improve control of the use of this important and essential component that makes possible not only agriculture, but also access to basic products, the socioeconomic survival of many people, and the improvement of the status of various depressed society, and also for the health of our environment. This being said, we emphasize the importance of continued dialogue and collaborative efforts to navigate these challenges effectively while safeguarding both health and agriculture. Effective social dialogue, industrial relations, and collective bargaining, together with strong legislations, emerge as crucial factors in tackling diverse challenges and harmonizing the concerns and interests of all stakeholders engaged in these processes. However, in relation to the existing debate on glyphosate, we should add the lack of real alternatives that allow the development of the agriculture industry from today's societal perspective. All those options that have been put on the table and that claim to meet the production level that glyphosate allows today do not do so at the same standards that glyphosate does. This means that alternatives need to be better developed in order to make the transition to better alternatives safe and just. This means to do not abandon anyone along the way. However, today's lack of alternative presents several limitations that have been already shared. Those are economic implication, employment implication, the limit of access to essential resources, etc. In addition, abandoning the use of glyphosate in the European Union territory would have a huge negative effect in regions such as the Global South, where the use of the glyphosate would increase, leading its population to real risk because of the lack of proper management, such as the one that exists in the European Union scope. By now, the only reality that exists is that the existing alternatives would not be prepared to meet the realities of the market, and this will affect people under the above-mentioned trilemma. In conclusion, Group 2 supports glyphosate use, emphasizing its crucial role in agriculture for weed control, economic impact, and job creation. We highlight safety measures, positive environmental effects, and stress the lack of viable alternatives or the consequences that this might have in third countries. The call for continued glyphosate use is grounded in the need for comprehensive alternatives to sustain agriculture. In summary, Group 2 advocates a balanced approach, emphasizing research and collaboration for responsible glyphosate use. Thank you very much for your attention and looking forward for the debate.
Thank you very much to you, Marwan, for bringing and summarizing the position of Group 2, which is mainly the position of employers and farmers. So I think now it's time to, like with Olga, giving the floor to Group 2 for further comments about this position about glyphosate. If there is anyone that wants to step in the conversation, feel free to raise your hand and comment on Marwan's presentation or bring new arguments. Isabella?
Yes, thank you. I am not from Group 2, but I was, thank you very much for this.
Sorry,
yes.
Isabella, because afterwards I will give the floor for counter reactions between the two groups.
Okay.
So I will now prioritize participants from Group 2, if there is any. What about Kasia?
Yes, thank you for the great summary in the debate. I'm a bit late with my press release, but I just wanted to add also the argument, I'm in Group 2, that maybe we could point out that food prices will be affected. So if we allow the use of glyphosate, we can ensure sort of a steady supply of foods, thus keeping the price of food down for especially vulnerable people who have trouble putting food on the table, which is especially important in times of sort of climate change and war, which is already putting pressure on food supply in the world.
Thanks a lot. Rich?
Yeah, I was in Group 2. I lied to that. It was maybe I didn't put it in my press release, but there's also the impact on land use change that maybe wasn't captured there as well. Certainly in third countries, but also within Europe, if this change hadn't been made, how much more land would have had to be converted to agricultural land in order to get the same yield and to keep the global supply chains going. I don't think that was necessarily captured, but it's quite a big important thing when we're looking at environmental impacts more generally, and deforestation, loss of ecosystems and things like that. So wanted to emphasize that, and also add a little bit extra into the ideas about kind of why the use of glyphosate can be deemed to be in favor of keeping carbon in the ground and soil, preventing soil degradation, because there are, I discovered in my research, people who are involved in regenerative farming who use glyphosate as the minimum and the only input that they put into their processes, so that they don't then have to turn the soil over or use vast amounts of pesticides, which have also, you know, wider carbon and environmental impacts. So it's that holistic look at environmental impacts and a balance of risks and precautions that need to be taken.
Thanks a lot for this comment, which probably could open the discussion between the two groups now. We have learned a lot from each group's position. We have also learned, for example, that glyphosate for Group 2 contributes to environmental sustainability and sustainability of ecosystems, which was the opposite argument from Group 1. And the same goes if we think about social justice, the issue about food security, the issue about prices. So how could we strike a balance between these two apparent different positions between the two groups? And one, I mean, paradox, which actually is not a real paradox, but in the end, both groups argued for social dialogue and collective bargaining as a process to balance the different interests involved in this case. Could that be a solution, a sustainable one, an effective one? So let's open the discussion between the two groups, starting with Ruth.
Thank you. And I also wanted to thank again Olga and Marwan for summarizing the discussions, because in our group, for example, there was so much text. I say thank you. It's I admire your work at that. And at the end now, I had thinking about, because there was the topic of food security. And just for example, to take, I'm living in Vienna, one of the richest countries in the whole world, and they throw every day tons of bread away because there is such a thing of overproduction. No one needs that here, and it does not stop. So I think, and also thinking together with the next module of how can we make the co-determination rights of workers stronger, and what can we influence, is the question of food production also. So where is what produced under which conditions? Because I have to say, I'm a little bit, I think it's strange to argue with food security, because on the one hand we have countries and continents where we have lots of food and it's not good distributed, and we have lots of subsidized food production, especially in Europe, for the agriculture. So maybe there is time for more, how to say, influencing and really to say, how can we co-determine what is when and where and how produced, also under the thinking of more sustainable food production and distribution worldwide. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. Mark?
Hi, thank you, Ruth. Ruth, sorry, I was just commenting on that. I think some of the geopolitical aspects to this are very much intertwined and very, very hard to disentangle. What you were saying as regards more efficient use of food and resources within rich Western countries, absolutely, that is something that has to be dealt with. But at the same time, we saw the impact that the disruption on grain supplies had from the Ukraine to places in North Africa and the rest of the world. And I think I remember seeing in my research that the withdrawal of glyphosate would lead to a predicted 30% drop in the yield from wheat production within Europe. So obviously by removing that without planning for it, without making those efficiencies or allowing or planning for those efficiencies, then you can create further trouble there, and that wouldn't be just in terms of its effect on the global south. Again, so it's trying to pull all these different elements apart. I found extremely difficult, useful, but very, very difficult, I have to say.
Thanks a lot. Daphne?
Hello. Yeah, it's good that I came after these two things, two people. I also find this an extremely complex issue, and sometimes I feel like banning or some solutions are very simplistic, and we really don't know the off-target effects it can have. And I would like to touch upon two things. One is like the issue of food security, which is of course very important, but also it kind of gets bastardized, pardon my French, sometimes by the industry. So like, for example, wheat, like we eat bread and pasta and we need that, of course, but we also use it to make beer and other things, which hurts me. I love beer, but it's not always like as essential, the use of these products, as we might think they are. So I'm kind of familiar with, for example, a bit of the sugar industry in Turkey, which from where I come from. And so sugar, and there's herbicide use in this industry. And for example, sugar is essential for a lot of things, but it also like goes into like pops, soda pops and all that, yeah? But another important thing coming to the global south part now, leaving food security, is that, for example, because of, if you have a weak currency, which is the state of many global south or developing countries, input-dependent farming is very hard for farmers and peasants because their input dependency and import of these inputs are also dependent on the currency fluctuations. So one example I saw was that according to prices, sometimes, so farmers prefer to use the herbicides if they can, because it really, really helps them. It really makes it less laborious, the work, but some years they can't afford and they have to pull out manually the weeds. And then that causes like a shortage of workers. Then there's like migrant worker issues and worker exploitation that comes directly into view. So I think in light of these complexities, it becomes even more important to have good organized workers, farmers, that they could really react, because I don't think the most genius policy proposal still won't be enough to predict all these complications. So it's very important, in my opinion, to have organized farmers and workers that could really mitigate and bargain on the issues as complications arise. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Isabella, if you want to step in the conversation now.
Thank you, but I think Alessandra was before me. No? Okay. Okay, I can come in. My question, thank you very much for the summary that you did, Maren, and I was in a way pleased to be in group one, because I thought group one was much easier than group two to discuss. And I am a little bit puzzled with one argument that has been presented in group two on the lack of social protection for workers. I believe it's an argument going to global south and what we have learned just right now, but it's as if using the lack of social protection. We use glyphosate to mitigate the lack of social protection. I thought it was a little bit strange, or I did not understand clearly what it was about. But looking nowadays and currently about the discussion in each country or most of the countries with farmers demonstration around Europe nowadays, not on the glyphosate aspect, but on their income level and pension and revenue. I think the question you ask, Paolo, on social dialogue and collective bargaining, this makes sense to help farmers to be organized. But yeah, if you can clarify the use of social protection, lack of social protection as a counterpart of the use of glyphosate, I will be pleased.
Sure. May I just go through it? Well, the main idea was that if the proposition about abandoning glyphosate directly without having proper alternatives would lead to a huge number of workers without any protection. That was the main idea. So we abandon glyphosate, what will have to go through these workers, what will suffer these workers, and are our social tools ready to protect them? We will be able to replace them in other works. We will be able to give them social income while they're transitioning to new jobs. That was the idea. So glyphosate is not protecting socially, but if we abandon glyphosate, what will happen socially to those workers? And are states ready today to protect all the workers that are linked to glyphosate sector and those sectors that are adjacent to the glyphosate sector? That was the idea. I don't know if now I explain it more clear.
Fair enough. Let's go back to Mark.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, just responding to Isabella's point there regarding manpower, if you like. As far as I understand it, the switch to non-glyphosate farming would necessarily be more labor intensive. So it would require more people working the land. And that because the EU already imports a lot of its agricultural labor from outside the EU, which is already, I think it's generally recognized that the people working in that sector have very few rights, generally work in quite poor conditions. I think one of the implications of removing glyphosate or stopping the use of glyphosate is that you would increase that kind of poor quality labor. That's not necessarily a really good argument for not getting rid of glyphosate. It sounds like that would be more of a improving social protection within the European Union. But I think that might be one of the threads in that part of the argument, at least.
Thanks, Mark. Kasia?
Yeah, I think Mark just covered some of my argument now, but I was just saying that in group 2, we used sort of job losses as a threat to phase out glyphosate, but we could also, it would probably be more labor intensive, as Mark was saying, as we would need to use other methods like manual methods to get rid of pests instead. So perhaps we could use it as an argument also that it would maybe not hurt the number of jobs, but maybe hurt profits for the agricultural industry.
Thanks. Ruth?
Sorry, did you say Ruth? Because my internet relation is not so well at the moment. I don't know if you hear me.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to Isabella, what Isabella said about the alliance with the farmers. I don't know how it is in other countries, but for example, in Austria, that's the most subsidized, privileged group in Austria, with very strong alliances to the right-wing conservatives. And on the one hand, on the big farmers, and on the other hand, also lots of exploitation of migrant workers in the agriculture. So I just want to point out that we have to be a little bit, how you say, aware with whom we want alliances and what we fight for, because in Austria, for example, they're really instrumentalized by the right wings, and I think we have to be really look at which farmers are our allies and what they want to produce, etc. Because yeah, I just want to stress that, because it's a real big political topic, and also a topic of huge power in Austria, for example. And yeah, thank you.
Is there anyone that want to react to Ruth's comment right now? If so, please go ahead. Otherwise, we should also have a look at the chat. Yes? Yeah, for
Sorry,
example,
this is
Birgit raised
yeah,
her
this is
hand, but not
Yeah.
the emoji. So yeah,
no, sorry.
sorry about
First
that.
of all, I came late. Yeah, do you hear me? I came late, and now I do have some technical issues here. It's a little strange, but just tell me how to raise the yellow hand, and then we'll get back to you later, because I have a couple of things to say. I would get, but it's a little bit strange. My views in here are. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, and you can go ahead.
Are you? Oh, okay.
Yes,
Okay,
you're on.
Well, speaking from a German perspective, I'm a little bit concerned about what was said by Group 2, because this argument, well, first of all, there are a couple of NGOs dealing with lobbyism at Brussels level. I pointed that out in my little report. Let's say Corporate Europe Observatory, there is EU Scream, there is a FIAN, which deal with the issue of lobbyism by the chemical industry. And as you all know, Bayer, the German multinational, bought Monsanto and is at the forefront of glyphosate manufacturing worldwide and marketing. And there is a huge organization by the chemical multinationals, the new glyphosate task force, which was installed and set up to argue for the extension of the ban, of the allowance, permission of glyphosate. So we have to deal with a decade-long lobbyism by the chemical industry. A lot of the arguments you presented are very well-known arguments put forward by these new glyphosate task force or new glyphosate new alliance by the multinational chemical companies. For instance, when you're talking about the issue of job losses, you're talking about jobs in the chemical industry, which is a little bit ridiculous considering that they're also producing other pesticides, a part of those containing glyphosate, and they are producing pharmaceutical stuff and a lot of other things. And secondly, they are cooperating with the chemical workers union, but not with the agricultural union. So we have a division within the labor force. The food and agriculture workers union in Germany, but also at European level, are pro-banning glyphosate. While industry all, I don't know what they are saying, but like in our country, the chemicals workers union is not saying anything about banning glyphosate, because they are the social partners with the chemical industry. So we very much have to be aware of this background information And then we do have the issue of where does the public money go? And we had a very big issue here about which studies or research studies and which academic scientific evidence is used for an argument and which is not. And there is a criteria that's called best laboratory quality issues or laboratories, which is to say that research evidence put forward by laboratories of multinationals are considered to be of better quality than research evidence put forward by academia or institutes in universities. And like in our case, the German national case, the National Risk Assessment Agency and the National Food and Safety Authority, they pretty much stick to the findings of these private laboratories, and public ones complain. And you can listen to podcasts by the Green Party, the Heinrich Böll Foundation, but others also from other universities complaining about not being heard. They say that the reviews been done by these national authorities and also by ECHA, as the European Chemical Authority, and the European Food and Safety Authority, that their reviews are selective and they don't take
Apologize, Birgit.
Yeah.
There are some audio problems, and I invite you to conclude your intervention.
Okay.
So it leaves
Okay.
space to others.
I stop. I'm sorry. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. That was really useful insight. Now I see 3 hands raised. The order is Alessandra Molz first, then Stefan, and then Nora. So Alessandra, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Paolo. First of all, apologies for not sharing my video today. I have a COVID infection and I really don't want to share my video today and show my face. And I think you all understand because we've all been there. It's very interesting how multi-layered this topic is. And we've been now come up to almost a philosophical or very, very high top level. And I would like to draw it back to what Paolo said at the beginning and to think about how could social dialogue play a role and what could be solutions also in inverted commas that could be, I don't want to say wrong solutions, but that could mislead us maybe. And I would like to go back to also Marouane's very good presentation. And one of the arguments that he mentioned, which was like, we train the workers, they know how to use this, they have all the protective gear, they know all the protocols. So basically the argument of the group 2 to say, we can control this. We can control this by giving skills to the workers. We can control this with technology because we give them gloves, because we give them, I don't know what other protective measures. And this could at the same time be of course, a way to say, okay, we mitigate the risk for the workers themselves, but it could also create the solution, the illusion that something like this, a chemical substance that is so harmful, can actually be controllable. And I don't have the solution to this, but I wanted to throw this into this discussion that if we look, for instance, strictly at labor rights of the workers working in the industry, with the chemicals directly. You know, you could say, okay, we can control this, we can do that. They get full equipment, they know how to do this, problem solved. And I think this also leads us to the notion where we have to connect the rights of the individual worker to a more collective right, or where we also need to bring in, where there's a need to bring in science and to say, okay, but what about factors that we cannot control? Can we really control everything? What about other effects, not direct effects on this worker's health at the workplace, but indirect effects that glyphosate will have on groundwater, on the atmosphere, on biodiversity, etc., etc. So I just wanted to highlight this type of aspect or of nudge to our discussion.
Thanks a lot, Alessandra. Very good point against the business case argument for workers' protection. They can control that, but only partially, and they cannot control the negative externalities. So now I give the floor to Stefan. Please limit your interventions to 2-3 minutes maximum. Thanks, Stefan. We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So I was thanking the presenters for the wonderful summary that they've done. I learned a lot. I was in group 1. I'd like just to make the 3 points.
There are some audio problems, Stefan.
Can you hear me now?
Much better.
Okay, so I hope you can hear me. All right, so the first point is on the food security. I think we've heard people saying about the food waste. I'd just like to add that today in EU, we use 30% of our land to produce animal feed, which means that if we were changing our diet to less meat, we could free some land. So I think between the 30% food waste and the 30% of land, which is used for feeding animals, we could potentially compensate the risk of additional land use if we stop glyphosate. So I think that's something I'd like to reflect on. Second thing, I'd like to reflect on the history of the case, notably from the workers' perspective. Because according to me, for the last 40 years, the farmers have complained that they cannot make a proper revenue, they don't take holidays, and we know that small farms are closed every year. And the solution of continuing to use glyphosate is basically to say more of the same thing. So I'd like to ask if anyone can believe that with more of the same thing, we can sort out a decade-long problems, you know, and if it's not time to find new solution. And this is on that perspective that I'd like to challenge a little bit the way we listen to social dialogue at the moment. I think social dialogue are organized within company, within sectors. But I'd like to invite a social dialogue based on citizens' assembly, where workers from the agri community will also be joined by residents, by scientists, and along the system we've organized, for example, the climate change in France, maybe we could have a different opinion. And my best guess is that there will be something about targeting the public, because also there is something in social dialogue that I'm missing, is that it is as if all farmers were the same. Big farmers with large exploitation, small farmers. And I never heard in group 2 argument the fact that we could target the public a bit more finer, a bit fine and subtly, I would say, and then maybe address the problem of those who desperately need glyphosate compared to those who do not need that. And it might well be that maybe the small farmers do not need as much glyphosate as the big farmers, and that in the logic of fairness and reducing inequality, maybe there should be a social dialogue questioning if we should not target better the type of measure per public. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Stefan, for these great insights about the idea of enlarging such dialogue to involve other social forces, citizens, NGOs, and other relevant stakeholders much beyond the traditional idea of such dialogue in labor relations. That's really something that we need to balance the different interests involved in this case. So Nora, thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you very much. Thankfully, most of the arguments have already been made, so I don't have to repeat them. I just want to ask how come ecological farmers can work successful without glyphosate? So there are alternatives. And that also means that abandoning that herbicide would produce more qualified jobs in the farmer's business, because you would have more farmers, or could have more farmers, who work ecologically and therefore more qualified than the poor farmers that are now exploited in the big farms. And my final point already is related to the beginning, to balance things. I think really things are complex and complicated and contradictory all the time. The problem is, in my view, that the ecological crisis is so serious that some things have to give. We will not have a transition that saves planet and people. We want to save both, without some people losing out and having to change seriously. So I think the question is, who can lose and who cannot lose, right? And we have to look at the poorer people, more vulnerable people, that they can develop, and some more powerful people with more resources, they have to lose things because it costs a lot to transition. Thank you.
Thanks, Nora, for such insightful comments. Is there anyone that wants to react to Nora's questions and comments? Yeah, one thing that is also related to Nora's comment is the one about the outcomes of the transition, not only the process, but also the outcomes. But because when it comes to food security, for example, what kind of food culture we want to promote in the transition away from chemicals in the agricultural sector, for example, do we still want to base our food security on intensive production of meat, for example, or do we want to shift to a more sustainable way of consuming food and food products? The overall idea is very much how we want to shape the idea of justice in the transition away from this polluting industry. Is that a more transformative idea that we want to bring to change radically our society towards a more solidarity-based, cooperative model? Or do we want to have a bread and butter kind of transition? So these are also key questions to put forward to the discussion. So Miriam and then Austin. So Miriam first and then Austin. Austin would be the last comment by the participants, because we then have 15 minutes to wrap up.
Okay. I'm sorry, Austin had risen his hand first. Is that okay? If
right.
I will be very quick.
Okay. Apologize. So Austin, go ahead. Then Miriam, and then I'll give the floor to Frank Lan that will present us the overall learning outcomes of this group exercise. So thanks, Austin.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to find out from the two presenters in terms of, one, the level of compliance for provision of adequate protective clothing and equipment to the workers who work in the field where glyphosate is applied regularly. What is the level of compliance on the part of the employer or smallholder farmers with the idea to protect the health and safety conditions of the workers working in the fields. That's one thing. Then on the other side, what is the level of commitment in terms of corporate social responsibility on the part of the bigger institutions which produce such chemicals as glyphosate, as they are sent out through their distribution systems up to the level where the community itself suffer from the residual effects of application of glyphosate. So what is the level of commitment in terms of corporate social responsibility to save the planet, to save the community, and enhance justice in that perspective? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Austin. I quickly go back to Miriam for her final comment, and then I give the floor to Franklin.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I will try to be very quick. I especially appreciate, I appreciated the very vivid conversations on the forum. You can be assured of my gratefulness. I won't expand too much on it, but it was really an excellent session, also a big wrap up. And I especially appreciate the fact that Nora and Stefan's interventions in particular brought the question back to local democracy. If I want to focus on the role play of the employer, that was really tough to get into that mindset that is very counterintuitive. I would say that the question of democracy goes beyond the purview of the job of those employers, of those big companies, but quote unquote, let me role play for a minute. I am committed as other employers in the sector to engage with the community and to speak with leaders. And then if I put out that hat for a minute, I have seen in the chat some doubts with regards to the function of citizen assemblies and local democracy. I do believe there is huge work to be done to politicize the issue, not so much in terms of political party, but rather to make sure that the issues are phrased in terms of socioeconomic project for the future and not just glyphosate, and like a much broader scope. And that also comes from the competence of local communities, of individuals that take that leadership. And I feel like this is an element that's crucially missing in this chain. It's not that there's no one, is that this burden falls on the shoulders of a few, and it's really tough. So it's encouraging to see some fights and some movements happening on the ground and picking up these glyphosate and highly sometimes technical debates, but also to politicize them. And I think this is a great thing that we've done in this course, and I look forward to the next sessions, the next readings, the next practice. I wish there was another exercise like this, but let's not expend too much on it. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much, Miriam. This is a very nice concluding remark for our discussion. And I now give the floor to Franklin for his final presentation of the learning outcomes of this forum activity and group exercise.
Thank you so much, Paolo. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so what I'm going to do is try to analyze your group activity through the lens of environmental sustainability competencies. My key messages are the following. I argue that the form of activity on glyphosate contribute to developing your green competencies or environmental sustainability competencies, but I have to admit also that these green competencies were much more developed in Group 1 compared to Group 2, and this is what I will try to explain a little bit in more detail. So my presentation is divided in 4 different steps. First one, I define the concept of green competencies or environmental sustainability competencies. Second, I will have a closer look and explain a green competence framework approach used by the E2I. I mean, its origin, but also the content of this approach in terms of competencies. And at this point, I will try to make the link to articulation between these 5 green competencies and the outcome of your glyphosate case analysis. Third, I will introduce the ETI Green Competence Framework approach that has been developed in recent years by a group of trainers. I have the chance to coordinate it. And I will just conclude by an handbook called Green Competencies for Trade Unionists, a case-based approach, which has been released a couple of weeks ago. First, the definition. When we talk about green competencies, what we are talking about. Here is the definition coming from CEDEFOP, quite, not so recent, 2010, sorry. Basically, it's about the basic definition of competencies that mean knowledge, abilities, values, and attitudes needs to live in, develop, and support a society which reduces the impact of human activity on the environment. But let's have a closer look on sustainability competencies. And this is a more recent definition coming from the European Commission, a book called European Sustainability Competence Framework, 2022. When we talk about sustainability competence, it's about empowering learners to embody sustainability values and embrace complex systems in order to take or request action that restores and maintains ecosystem health and enhances justice, generating visions for sustainability futures or sustainable futures. So in this definition, I think some keywords which are values. When you talk about sustainability competencies, we are talking about values, and I'll come back later when I will talk about green competencies. But it's not to say that values is enough. We need also to take action, and this is a key element of sustainability competencies. And actually, this is at the core of the activity that you have developed is to take action. But what kind of action? To restore, to maintain, and of course also to promote justice, to promote social justice. This is for the basic definition of what we call green competencies or environmental sustainability competencies. What about now the green sustainability competency approach? And here on this slide, you can find that these approaches is based basically on 5 competencies. We call them big competencies, meta competencies. In other words, these are global competencies. And these are the following: ethics and responsibility competence, competence in terms of change, prospective competence, collective competence, and systemic competence. So why these competences are big or meta, in other words? Because actually these competencies can be used in any sector. They are really transversal to any kind of sector. This is the first point. Another element is that these competencies are clearly interconnected. That means when you develop your ethics and responsibility competence on one hand, for sure, it will have impact on competence in terms of change, but also on the prospective competence, the collective one, and the systemic competence. Another element, these competences are very broad. That means they need to be contextualized. If, for example, I take the example of ethics and responsibility competence. We know that it's all about value, it's all about take responsibility, but what does it mean? What does it mean specifically for trade unionists, for example? And this is where these global competence become much more specific. And I will talk about that when I will introduce the ETI's Green Competence Framework approach. So now I look at your group activity, and I will try to identify where these 5 competencies appears. let's have a look. Collective competence. The collective competence is the competence in terms of organized collectively to tackle the issue of glyphosate. Actually, it was this competence has been clearly developed in group number 1. Remember when Olga presented the summary of this group exercise, she emphasized the fact that it has been a collective exercise, which encompass activists, trade unions, labor and environmental law scholars, and so on. That means it's clearly here the case of building alliances between, a different set of, stakeholders, as it has been said during the discussion by Stefan. Collective competence, clearly, it was developed during group number 1. Prospective competence. The prospective competence, by definition, prospective is the ability to prepare for the future by anticipating new scenarios and new narrative. Again, we have to admit that it was developed by group number 1 when they, for example, they propose alternative solutions in order to reduce the harmfulness of glyphosate, or, for example, when they discuss job managing losses, for example. So again, they try to anticipate the future, but also to try to find, new scenarios and how this future could be tackled. Third competence, responsibility and ethics competence. It's about ability to act according to values, to take responsibility for your action. And in this case, it was again the case of group number 1 when they invoke the precautionary principle or the just transition principle. They invoke, values, and it was clearly, one of the strong arguments of their, position. The systemic competence. The systemic competence, by definition, is the ability to get a holistic approach. That means to get a broader view. Again, group number 1 was very, very, strong in these competences, because they invoke, when they, develop the analysis of the harmfulness of glyphosate, they analyze that through the lens of, or to the perspective of workers, community, food security, environment, and fight against colonialism. So they really talk, a very holistic approach dealing with this environmental problem of glyphosate. And last competence in terms of change. Yes, when we talk about that, by definition, is the ability to analyze change factors. And there, I have to admit that it has been developed by group number 2. Remember, when group number 2 talk about abandoning the use of glyphosate, they really try to say, okay, if we change, that means if we decided to abandon the use of glyphosate, there could be, job losses, there could be, economic impact for farmers and also for workers. So I would say that for this competence in terms of change, it has been really developed by group number 2 and not by group number 1. Of course, it's a roof analysis, but you can see that clearly group number 1 has a strong development in terms of green competencies. This is for the, environmental green competence approach. Now, I would like to put the focus on specifically on the E2I green competence approach. Clearly, here we talk about the same competences, the same green competences, but with some kind of differences in terms of meaning of these competences. For example, when you talk about collective competencies, according to the E2I Green Competence Framework approach, it's about the ability of trade unions to cooperate with each other and other social player. And I think it was also stressed during the debate that we have together, the importance to build alliances with civil society and between trade unions and civil society. It could be NGOs, it could be environmental NGOs, it could be other social, players. Regarding the prospective competence, from the ETI perspective, it's about expanding the role of trade unions and ultimately that of workers in a world characterized by uncertainty. The prospective competence means planning for the consequences of environmental policies. Ethics and responsibility competence, yes, it's also always about acting according to values, but more precisely, it's taking care of present, but also future generation of workers in a carbon neutral economy. It's what we call to have an intergenerational approach. Not only current workers should be, protected, but also future generation of workers should be also in our analyze. The systemic competence, as it has been said before, it's to get an holistic approach, but more precisely, here it's analyzing environmental issue to different perspectives, employers, government, local community, investor, but also to ensure that decisions taken in favor of some workers don't interact adversely with decisions taken for others. We know that it's not always possible. It's not always possible to develop this attitude to avoid this knock-on effect between sectors, but this is also something we need to achieve. And the last competence in terms of change is to analyze strong and weak signal of change and the impacts on workers. This is, in a nutshell, the presentation of the ETI Green Competence Framework approach. As you can see, based on 5 big competences, but these competences have been translated to the, I would say, the trade unions perspective. And I would just finish by briefly presenting this book, this handbook called Green Competencies for Trade Unionists, a case-based approach. This book is a result of 2 years of work done by a wonderful team of 15 experienced trainers from various trade unions organizations across Europe. We have produced a tremendous number of cases, 27 different cases covering different sectors, coal mining sector, transport sector, tourism sector, agriculture sectors, just to cite a few. So if you want to go deeper, if you want to be inspired by other cases than the one you have discussed in your group activity, this is the opportunity for you to digger into these different cases. So that's it. Just further readings you can find here. Access to this guide, but also just to mention that the Commission also published recently its own sustainability competence approach, and if here called the Green Comp. It's also very similar to the approach developed by the ETI, but instead of 5 big competencies, there are 12, but quite encompassing the same meaning. So that's it for my very short presentation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Franklin. That was really helpful. I hope the same for the participants. Really, thank you all for this fantastic and instructive conversation. We have all learned a lot from this case and from our comments. We have developed a collective knowledge. We have co-created knowledge about glyphosate and the many contradictions attached to it. And this was actually one of the main goals of this activity. So thank you very much for your contribution to the discussion. And last but not least, we have developed also some green competencies, and this was another goal for this MOOC in general. I want to thank again Olga and Marwan for their great contribution in summarizing the positions of the two groups, and I wish you all a fruitful continuation of this course. Thanks.